we have quite a few people that have joined us. So Christine, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. It's so exciting to have everybody here. We had so many people register and great to see so many participating. And I've been looking at the names and places roll in the chat. If you haven't yet introduced yourself in the chat, go ahead and tell us who you are. As Danielle said, we are going to be using both the chat and the Q&A function throughout the webinar. And you will all be on mute, but you can contribute and ask questions and comments in either of those ways. As Danielle said, I'm Christine Johnson-Staub from the Center for Law and Social Policy, CLASP. And I'm going to just take this opportunity to do a little bit of an overview of the agenda and let you know what to expect for the next hour and a half. So the goal of the webinar, I think, overall, the goal of the webinar is that all of you know what's in the American Rescue Plan for children and for childcare, and that the message that you take away is let's get these dollars out so that they can help providers and programs and families. We are going to give you specific ideas that whether you're a state administrator, whether you're an advocate, whether you're a local funder, whether you're a nonprofit direct service agency, that you'll take something away about how these funds can be used in a timely, meaningful, and effective way, and what role you can play in doing that. We know we have a broad audience, and we really hope that you'll take actionable ideas and next steps away from this conversation and then work together at the state level to really make them happen. I'm going to just go through our speakers up front so you know who you'll be hearing from. First, we're going to have Katie Hamm, who's the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Early Childhood Development. And then we're going to have Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan from Minnesota. And then we're going to shift into a little bit of a panel, and we'll have Cheryl Morman, who is from Blessings and Above Family Child Care, and also the president of the Virginia Alliance of Family Child Care Associations, and Carla Whiteside-Hicks, who's the director of TANF and Early Childhood Programs at the Kansas Department for Children and Families, and Keisha Smith of Krayons Child Care Center in Newport, Kentucky. And then finally, we're going to hear from Leila Schochet, who is the policy advisor for Senator Patty Murray of Washington. And now I'm going to kick it over to Danielle Ewen from EducationCounsel, who you've already heard from, to welcome Katie Hamm. Go ahead, Danielle.
Thank you so much, Christine. We are lucky today to have Katie Hamm join us. I'm going to spend just a minute introducing Katie. We are thrilled to have Katie in this important role. I cannot think of a better person to serve the country in this role at this moment in history. Many of you know Katie from her role that she previously played at the Center for American Progress, where she was dedicated to making sure that children and families and providers had everything they needed to be successful. Katie has led many efforts to make sure that our community can speak to state and federal governments. She has been extraordinary in reaching out to different communities, including family child care providers, parents, center directors. She has incredible relationships with state agencies and state governments, as well as state advocates. And of course, at the national level, she has been a leader for years. I am honored that she joined us here today, and I look forward to her comments. We are, as I said, just so happy to have her. And if I could see all of you and have you all wave at her and give her a round of applause, we would. But if you can just put your woohoos into the chat, that we are honored to have Katie Hamm with us. So Katie, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to speak. After Katie is done, we will have time for questions and answers. So if you want to go ahead and put your questions for her in the chat or in the Q&A, we'll make sure to address those. Katie, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for that incredibly kind introduction. I'm honored to be with you all today. Thank you for having me. As Danielle said, I'm Katie. I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. and the traditional lands of the Nacotchian, Anacostan, and Piscataway people. In my role at ACF, I'm in the Office of Early Childhood Development, where we lead interagency work across the federal government with the goal of better supporting children and the adults who care for them. We work closely with both the Office of Childcare and the Office of Head Start to implement the country's 2 major early childhood programs. Our long-term vision includes building a well-resourced support system for parents and young children and families, thinking about nutrition, health insurance, mental health, early care and education, and connecting these supports together and being inclusive of children of immigrants, children with disabilities, and children of color. The Biden administration is very focused on the family experience. How does a parent or family member enroll or get services for their young child? What does their experience look like? And so I want to talk to you today about the COVID-19 response, but I also want you to know that we are thinking about the future. We are thinking about how we can realize that vision of a well-resourced early childhood system that addresses children's comprehensive needs. So I am joining you today from my home, which includes 2 young children. My son Nathaniel is 5, and he is doing virtual preschool. We have public preschool here in DC. My daughter Beatrix is 1, and her childcare is currently closed. It's been closed for a year. She's actually never attended because she was 3 months old when the pandemic started. We're not sure when or if it will reopen. I know many of you are in the same boat with caregiving responsibilities at home, virtual school, and perhaps uncertainty about what the future holds for your family. I share many of those same thoughts and concerns, and I want to thank you for all the work you're doing, whether that's being a childcare advocate, providing early childhood services, or working in state and local government where we need so much to support to implement this. I wanted to start today by sharing a story that hit very close to my home. A couple months ago, a block from where I live, there was a mom who was working in a gig economy job. She was delivering food for one of the companies that does on-demand food delivery. And she didn't have childcare in the evenings. So she had her 2 children in the backseat. They were 2 and 4. And while she was delivering food at the front door, someone stole her car with the 2 children in the backseat. Fortunately, in this case, the children were found a couple of hours later unharmed. The entire neighborhood joined a search party to find them. But when I think about our childcare crisis, so much of it is embodied in the story. Parents are stressed financially, and it's not uncommon for them to find work in the gig economy, especially with unemployment so high. Childcare is almost impossible for parents to find in the evenings, and those with unpredictable income and schedules often find it hard to make childcare arrangements. And while this particular incident happened during the pandemic, I think most of us probably realize it could have happened before the pandemic. Unfortunately, limited childcare options, low wages for early educators and family childcare providers, and price constraints for parents are nothing new. But at the same time, a lot has changed when it comes to childcare in the last year. Childcare providers were asked to put their own health and safety on the line to care for the children of essential workers and those who could not work from home with children. They had to figure out new ways to keep children and staff and follow new rules and train staff on new rules. There's been unpredictability as programs have had to close and reopen depending on COVID cases and public health guidance. And the world has learned what this community has known all along. Childcare is essential. The people who do this important work and the people who make it happen in states and territories and tribes around the country are essential, and they need to be treated that way. Many parents have struggled as they faced reduced earnings and job loss, along with the pressure of not having school open in all cases and not having as many childcare options. And many of you have worked harder than ever before to support childcare providers in your state and community. I wanted to take a moment to specifically thank any childcare providers who are joining us today. They're more likely watching the recording later on since it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Our thanks will never be enough, but your work to care for the country's children during this pandemic has been heroic. You have our eternal gratitude for that. I want to talk about some of the specific steps that the Biden administration has taken in the first 65 days of this administration to address the crisis that the pandemic has precipitated in the childcare field. The first thing, earlier this month, HHS, the US Department of Health and Human Services, issued a directive on vaccines requiring states and pharmacies around the country to prioritize vaccines for early childhood educators, home visitors, early intervention staff, and family childcare providers, with the goal of moving towards in-person service delivery if it wasn't happening already. And I learned today that we've actually made quite a bit of progress on that goal. So I want to thank everyone who's been part of getting the word out and making sure people know how to make those appointments and access those vaccines when possible. Second, the administration released updated guidance for childcare providers, including specific resources for family childcare. The goal is to provide tools that take into account the specific needs of childcare providers in COVID mitigation. And last, but certainly not least, and our topic today is President Biden's American Rescue Plan passing Congress and finally bringing the relief that the childcare community so desperately needs. With the American Rescue Plan, there is $39 billion, that's billion dollars, to help childcare providers and families who are struggling across the country. In total, we now have $53.5 billion in childcare relief funding. The American Rescue Plan has two separate pots of funding to help with childcare. The first is a $24 billion stabilization program, and these are grants to childcare providers, both family childcare and center-based programs that will help cover their operating expenses, personnel costs, child and staff mental health needs, facilities maintenance, and PPE or other sanitation needs that you might have. And these resources can be used retroactively for expenses that occurred in the past. In addition, there is $15 billion for the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which will augment some of the existing funding in that program. And there's also some additional flexibility built into that program so that states and territories and tribes can use those resources to meet the comprehensive needs of children and families at this time that they normally would get in childcare programs and other supports. This is a huge opportunity. It is the largest ever investment in childcare. We know that childcare providers and families need these funds urgently. I have heard that some leaders in states are feeling optimistic, and that's with good reason. We're pleased with the increasing rates of vaccination in some parts of the country. We are seeing COVID cases going down, but we still know that the widespread financial disruption in the childcare sector is ongoing. We have a real risk of closure widespread closures in childcare if we don't use these resources quickly and get them out to providers to help them prevent from having to close their doors. So we're looking to partner with lead agencies, which includes states, tribes, and territories, to get the funds out to parents and childcare providers quickly. At the same time, we want to be strategic in how we use these funds. We don't want to invest in this childcare in the same way we always have. Some of the subsidy policies, frankly, have led to a point at which childcare was in a precarious position when the pandemic hit. So we want to be thinking about how do we invest in new ways that are going to get us to the childcare system that is supportive of children, of families, and providers. So at the Administration for Children and Families, we envision a childcare system that provides livable wages and benefits for early childhood educators and family childcare providers. We want to support quality options for families during a critical time in their child's life when their brain is developing quickly. We want to ensure that families are easily able to find convenient childcare that's in their neighborhood, including in the nights and weekends, and give them a range of options to choose from. We want to make childcare affordable for families. We want to promote equity for children, families, and childcare providers, including early educators and family childcare providers. And this is especially for children of color, providers of color, and people with disabilities. We want to support working families and provide consistent and stable access to childcare to help people enter or stay in the labor force. And so when I think about that vision we have, and I think about these resources, we now have an opportunity to start to make headway on some of these resources. So I want to focus them on some of those policy levers and encourage our partners at the state, tribe, and territory level to work with us and make investments in a way that's going to get us to this vision. And that includes 3 policy levers that I think can help us be successful. The first is increasing provider payment rates. And that includes not just having vouchers, but also having contracts and grants that can provide a more stable source of funding for childcare. Right now, we know that the average childcare subsidy in the course of a year is about $6,000. That doesn't even get us the average price of childcare now, let alone cover the operational costs that include some of the standards that childcare providers are required to meet, whether that's licensing or other quality benchmarks that the state has. The second policy lever is improving wages and benefits for the early childhood workforce. I don't think I have to tell this group that childcare wages at less than $12 an hour don't reflect the value of the work, and they can create a lot of things that undermine quality, like high turnover rates. So we really do think that the wages and benefits need to be in place so that we can grow and recruit and retain a highly effective workforce. And the last thing is building a supply of early childhood programs in low-income areas of the country. We know that our childcare infrastructure is lacking, especially in areas where people are paid low wages. And so we want to direct some of these resources and encourage states and territories and tribes to direct these resources to places where there is not enough childcare to serve the community. We know that states have flexibility in how they use these funds, but we really want to see progress towards these goals and measure them. And I think this is what will set us on the path for the systemic change that we need for children and their families and childcare providers. So with that, thank you again for having me, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Great, Katie, thank you so much. At the beginning of your presentation, we had a slide up that had the timelines for the different funding streams. Allison, if you'll put that slide back up, Katie, do you just want to walk people through those timelines?
Sure, happy to do that. So I think one of the questions that was submitted was around what the different timelines were for some of the different pots of funding. So there are now 4 different pots of COVID relief funds, and they do have slightly different periods for what's called obligation and liquidation, which are fancy terms that mean when you decide what you're going to do with the money and when you actually send that check. So the 4 pots of money that Congress has provided are the CARES Act funding. So that is the money that was received in April of 2020. And you can see that you have to obligate those funds by fiscal year 2022. In December of 2020, Congress passed an additional $10 billion. Those funds were awarded in February of 2021. And those are CRSA, I think is how we're pronouncing it. Those are the CRSA funds. And then most recently, earlier this month, there were 2 different pots of funding passed by Congress, supplemental funds for CCBG as part of the American Rescue Plan, or ARP as it is on the chart, and then the stabilization grants that passed as part of the American Rescue Plan as well. So in addition to these different periods for obligation and liquidation, there are some slightly different rules that apply. So states and tribes and territories will need to track these funds separately and make sure they're spending them on the allowable uses of funds.
And Katie, one of the questions that came up was about the 50% of the stabilization funds that have to be spent by in the first 9 months. Do you want to clarify that for folks?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So the law does require that states go ahead and notify HHS if by December of this year, they're not able to obligate 50% of their funds. So that will be a reporting requirement with the ARP funding, both the stabilization funds and the CCBG funds. I also want to acknowledge that I know that many states have told us that they are ready to get these funds out the door. They know that they are needed. They have a system or a strategy in place to get these resources to providers. Other states need their legislature to act, or they might face some logistical hurdles. So we want to work with you and try to make it easier if there's something we can do. But the intention really is that these funds will start to go out the door fairly quickly because of the urgency in the community.
Great. Allison, you can go ahead and take that slide down. Katie, let's talk generally. You laid out a number of different priorities that you hope states will take on. Let me ask the question a different way. Are there any prohibited activities? We've had lots of questions about whether family childcare is included, whether license exempt providers are included. Is there anything that they can't do with these funds, or are they as flexible as CCDBG and other funds have been through the years?
These are pretty flexible funds. So both the American Rescue Plan, ARP, and CRSA funds have additional flexibility that's designed to allow states to respond to the current health and economic crisis. So for CCDBG, for example, you can use the funds for any purpose that you would normally under CCDBG. And there are two important flexibilities to mention. First, you can use the funds to support children of essential workers, and there is no income cap. So as a state, you can determine who's an essential worker and cover all the children that are in families that are under those categories. And you are not required to use 70% of the funds on direct assistance. So all of the quality activities and other things that are part of the CCDBG law, those funds are available for all of those activities. For the stabilization funds, these are grants to childcare providers to help them during the pandemic. And there are 6 things that Congress has outlined that these grants can cover. The first is personnel, so that's salaries, benefits, efforts to recruit or retain staff. The second is rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, facility improvement. The third is personal protective equipment or PPE, sanitation and supplies, equipment and supplies needed to respond to the pandemic. And then there's a very general term, goods and services to maintain childcare services, which can include things like food, even facilitating immunization so that a childcare program can, assuming that's required by licensing, have immunization records lined up. That is very broad. Anything a childcare program might need to continue operating, and then mental health supports for children and employees. So there are quite a few flexibilities designed to allow lead agencies to respond to the crisis.
And what will states need to do to access these funds?
So we will be, ACF will be sending awards to states and tribes and territories. We are trying to get the funds out the door as soon as possible because we know they're urgently needed. We expect that both the stabilization funds and the CCDBG supplemental funds will be awarded within a month. There was some question that has come up around, is there a regulatory process that needs to happen on stabilization? There is not. We can send these awards and we are working actively to do that within a month.
Great. Thank you for guessing what my next question was going to be. But will you be putting out guidance on any of these awarded funds?
We will be putting out guidance. I am new to the federal clearance process, so I am not going to speculate on precise timing, but we hope very soon that we can issue the guidance on the $10 billion that passed in December, the CRSA funds. And then on the American Rescue Plan, we plan to issue guidance both on the CCDBG supplemental funds as well as the stabilization funds. We are working as fast as we can because we know that you all are going to want to hear from us before you determine how those funds are spent. So I'm hopeful that not too long after the awards go out, we'll be able to share guidance.
Katie, I'm just going to throw something in. I want you to clarify for folks. They've heard you say childcare center, they've heard you say other things. Can you say one more time all of the different kinds of providers that can be served with all of these dollars, including the stabilization fund?
Yeah, that's a really important point. I know under CCDBG, a lot of the funds are going to childcare centers right now. And that is not to be eligible for either CCDBG funds or the stabilization funds. you are not required to have historically participated in the Child Care and Development Block Grant Program or subsidies provided by that program. So family child care is affirmatively included. We are looking at this from an equity perspective. So we know that children of color, providers of color are more likely to be in home-based settings. So we affirmatively want to include home-based childcare providers, family childcare, and are looking for ways to support lead agencies and making sure that they are part of that.
Thank you for that. So you put up on your slide the 4 different pots of money. Are you envisioning that states will use those sequentially? Do you want them to think about it as one fund? How do you want them to use the different pots of money to transform the field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say definitely be mindful of the different obligation and liquidation periods so that nobody's leaving money on the table. So there are some deadlines that are coming up sooner rather than later. The stabilization funds are different from the other resources in that those are really required to go out as grants to childcare providers. And we know that the need for stabilization is very urgent. So we want to see those funds being used quickly. There are slightly different ways that the other CCDBG money can be used. I imagine a lot of states at this point have either allocated their CARES Act funds or have plans on how they're going to use them. So, I don't think I would recommend a particular sequence, but I would say you do have to track the funds separately, and the stabilization funds are the ones that really need to get to providers sooner rather than later.
So Katie, I want to follow up on that and ask you to repeat some things you said in your opening comments. Talk again about how you think stabilization funds can be used for providers, because I think some folks have joined us late and we're seeing a lot of questions about that.
Sure. So I can talk a little bit more about what the stabilization fund is for. This is, again, it's $24 billion that will be awarded to states and tribes and territories. Those funds are for the costs that providers have incurred or will incur, the operating expenses during the pandemic. So these can be very broadly used on things like personnel costs, salaries, rent, mortgage, as well as anything that you're experiencing as a result of the pandemic. So maybe you need a mental health consultant because of the trauma experienced by children and families and your staff. That would be an allowable use of funds. These are resources that we're expecting will be granted to childcare providers to address widespread financial disruption. And they are available to a broad range of childcare providers in a state. It can be centers, it can be family childcare homes. It is an industry-wide effort to stabilize the childcare industry. So it is meant to reach a lot of providers in your state, not just those that are part of the CCDBG system, but anyone who is either open and providing services during the pandemic or has had to close because of the pandemic is eligible to receive these funds.
Great. So I know we only have a few more minutes of your time, so I have 2 more questions, one a very technical one and one a general one. So the technical question is, we know that there is a supplement not supplant provision in about these funds. And so generally, how will ACF be monitoring the funds, making sure that states are supplementing, not supplanting? What's your plan to look out for that?
Yeah, and I don't want to, we are going to put out guidance and we're always happy to answer questions. So people should feel free to approach us if there's in doubt. So in general, supplement not supplant means that a state or lead agency can't spend less money on childcare than they did last year because they are getting more from the federal government. So that gets into somewhat complicated rules because of the 4 funding pots, there's different language around supplement, not supplant. So that's going to be an important thing to keep in mind. I would say that as a general rule, if there's an attempt to use CCDBG or childcare stabilization funds for something that the state used to fund with general revenue, it's probably not permitted. You can't plug in CCDBG money on something that the state used to fund. In the ARP, the American Rescue Plan Act, there's broader non-supplantation language. So you cannot supplement other federal funds like TANF or SSBG or local funds. So this does get very in the weeds, but I would say as a general rule, these funds should be supporting new services. So that could be the grant, the stabilization grants. It could be continuing to provide childcare subsidies. It could be new activities, but you can't backfill with things that the state used to fund with new resources.
Great. And let me ask you the $40 billion question to close out. We all understand and have been told that these are one-time only funds for now, although we do hope that we will be able to get more money in from Congress, and Lila's going to talk about that later. But what does that sort of one-time only moniker mean for how states should be spending the funds?
So I would say a few things about that. First of all money is one-time money, right? We're not getting, I mean, even programs that have long authorizations, it's not guaranteed. We're constantly working with legislators at the federal level, at the state level to secure resources. A lot of the problems that we have faced in childcare, whether it's low wages, reimbursement rates, provider payment rates that are insufficient, parents not being able to afford childcare payments, those are money problems, and money has been the problem for a long time. We are now in a place where we have the resources. And so it is incumbent upon us to think about how we fund the system that we want with the resources that we have, and not let a problem that might exist 3 years from now preventing us now from doing what we need to do. So that means not continuing to repeat some of the policies that put us in this position to begin with. We do need to think in new ways. The other thing that I would say is that we are in a unprecedented health and financial crisis. And so to a large extent, these resources have been allocated because parents, families, childcare providers are facing such a financial burden. So it is okay if provider reimbursement rates go up. It is okay if wages go up. It is okay if parents are paying less for childcare because they don't have to pay co-payments. All of that is a good response to the economic and health crisis that we find ourselves in. So from a systemic change perspective, we have the resources. We need to go forward with them and do what we need to do to change the system. And we also need to recognize that the reason we have these resources is because they mirror the magnitude of the crisis ahead of us.
Great. And what are your final words for the wide range of folks we have on the call right now? We have state administrators, we have advocates, we have parents, we have family childcare providers, we have legally unlicensed, we have childcare directors. Everybody you can imagine is listening to you right now. What do you want them to take away from you?
I feel like we're at a turning point, to be honest, where we've been saying for so long, we need to fund the system, and we have the resources to fund the system. So I know parents are tired. I know advocates are tired. I know childcare providers, family childcare providers are exhausted. So thank you for all you've been doing. And thank you for all you will do, because this is our moment to show what we can do when we have resources. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Katie. We had lots of questions we didn't have time to get to. We will collect those and make sure they're passed on to you and your staff so that they can be included in the guidance and other opportunities, okay?
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. If everybody can join me in waving at Katie and giving her a thank you in the chat, I'm now going to turn us over to Lauren Hogan.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Danielle, for an incredibly rich conversation that was both about the big picture and about the weeds. It's really hard to have a conversation in which we're talking both about obligating and liquidating. And while I'm also getting a little teary about our gratitude for early childhood educators and for the extraordinary opportunities up ahead. And yet here we are. So it is now, we'll keep talking again. Danielle mentioned we didn't get to all the questions. We are tracking them really carefully. You guys are asking great questions. We're going to keep those going to help develop the resources that we know we need to address We'll keep talking about the questions of sustainability and how we message this to everybody who needs to hear about it. As we sort of look forward, we're going to do a little bit now as we head into the next portion of learning from some of what's come before, some states and how they've been spending, what works for providers and programs as they get these dollars, so that we can learn about how to build on the best practices and successes as we move forward. To that end, it is now my very great pleasure to welcome the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan. She is the 50th Lieutenant Governor of the state. It's a 50-year anniversary for many different things. And she is the second American Indian woman to be elected to statewide executive office in US history. Early in her career, she served as the executive director of the Children's Defense Fund in Minnesota. And it's one of us. At the center of all of her work is advocating and making progress for children, working families, communities of color, and Indigenous communities and Minnesotans who have historically been underserved and underrepresented. With the good work of so many Minnesota advocates, the state was able to substantially support the child care sector over the last year. We're delighted to welcome Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, who is going to share a video with us about some more information about what they did, what it meant, and what we can learn from their experiences. So we're going to play that video for you all now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this webinar with childcare and early education leaders from across the country during this historic moment for childcare. I'm grateful to be here to share a little bit about Minnesota's efforts to support childcare, the industry and access during COVID, and the incredible opportunity before us with a historic investment in childcare within the American Rescue Plan. When the pandemic began to hit Minnesota, we asked our childcare providers and early educators to stay open and continue to serve families in order to have the workforce needed in our emergency response. Our childcare business owners and workforce answered the call in tremendous ways, and we are so grateful. And as businesses have come back online, childcare providers and early educators continue to be here to serve families. In Minnesota, our licensed childcare capacity is operating at nearly 100%. While trends in openings and closings can be somewhat erratic, especially for childcare centers, it appears that both openings and closings for family childcare and childcare centers slowed in the initial months of the pandemic response as compared to the previous year. We're still closely monitoring and analyzing these trends to better understand them. And we know that there's more work to do to continue to stabilize childcare businesses and support access. And this is the work our administration has prioritized from when we took office, recognizing the importance of affordable, accessible childcare for families and our economy. Governor Walz and I have charged our administration through the Children's Cabinet to support access to childcare and address the childcare shortage in Minnesota. This year has made the need and sense of urgency even clearer. Childcare providers and early educators are the backbone of our economy and the workforce behind our workforce. Their heroic efforts will go down in the pandemic history books, telling the story of the sacrifices of childcare workers that they made to ensure our first responders, frontline workers, and other workers could do their jobs. And most importantly, that our youngest children had stability and care during these challenging times. But the sacrifice and challenges of this industry and workforce are nothing new. Childcare workers and early educators always work tirelessly to support our children, families, businesses, and economy. And that's why seizing this moment to act quickly and boldly is important, not only to support the industry and families with young children, but to support our overall economic recovery. During the pandemic, our administration has doubled down on these efforts, and we are eager to leverage these new resources to continue to stabilize the industry and build toward a bolder vision of childcare. This work has been led by an interagency education and childcare COVID-19 response work group. A focus of these efforts has been to engage and build relationships directly with providers. We've learned so much from them to help inform our efforts and ensure that we are responding directly to their needs. Through this engagement, our administration has worked hard to identify ways to support childcare providers during this challenging time. In March of 2020, we developed a proposal and the legislature passed the Peacetime Emergency Child Care Grants, which played a critical role in ensuring there was childcare available for our emergency workers when most businesses shut down. This was a historic $30 million state investment. Our administration also advanced an additional $10 million in CARES Act CCDBG dollars. This $40 million supported about 3,100 childcare providers through a more competitive grant process. As we learn more about COVID-19 and childcare providers' needs, we prioritize $109 million in federal CARES Act coronavirus relief funds to provide support to all providers who are operating, serving children, and had a license in good standing. These funds, called the COVID-19 Public Health Support Funds for Childcare, reach more than 8,300 licensed and certified childcare providers. Using data and research, including from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and asking providers about their increased costs, we provided monthly payments of $8,500 for licensed centers and $1,200 for family childcare providers to be used for increased costs associated with public health guidance implementation, including cleaning and supplies, overtime, and incentives for working staff, and covering costs related to closures and exposures to COVID-19. Using the additional funds from the December stimulus, we continue to support these over the next couple of months as we dig into the childcare stabilization grants. Providers have told us that this funding has often meant the difference in their ability to remain open. To ensure access to these funds, we work to create a simple online application process, which takes about 5 minutes to complete, and partnered with Childcare Aware of Minnesota to provide technical assistance and support in multiple languages. We're incredibly grateful for their work and partnership to ensure equitable access to these funds. We also provided grant funding to organizations to support family, friend, and neighbor care for these providers that we know are a leading source of childcare for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities and families, and have had an increased need during the pandemic. Childcare access has been a priority also within our federal dollars. Thus far, we've invested about $40 million of federal resources in childcare assistance over the next 3 years. I have long advocated for our state's childcare assistance program and the benefits it has for working parents, employers, and children. This investment has and will mean a significant reduction, if not temporary elimination, of the program's waiting list in our state. We've also worked with the legislature to ensure we've increased the childcare assistance program reimbursement rates and are pushing for another increase this session. Additionally, we've supported providers through developing supply chains and providing critical care supplies through public and private partnerships. We prioritize childcare providers and early educators in their vaccine access, and now an estimated 2/3 of childcare and education workforce has received a vaccine. Through our Children's Cabinet, we've also prioritized ongoing communication and direct support in navigating public health guidance, financial support, and vaccine access for childcare providers. With near weekly childcare provider email updates, monthly childcare provider calls, and an email and phone line for childcare providers to seek support and get their questions answered. This communication and feedback loop has been key to our efforts and helped us better understand the needs for our childcare providers. While the new federal investment may be long overdue, this represents a historic investment and provides an opportunity to stabilize the industry, address childcare shortages, and provide business support, increase affordability, and build towards a bolder vision of early care and educational system. Minnesota received $135 million in February and is anticipated to receive more than $500 million through the most recent federal legislation, and we will engage with providers and stakeholders to determine the plans for these funds. We know it's essential to engage with providers and other stakeholders to implement the new law and make changes to best meet current needs. We'll also look at other states for best practices and consider sustainability in our efforts. We want to build back better, and now we have an opportunity to do so, and we will. And I'll close with gratitude. Thank you for looking after and advocating for our littlest learners. The research shows that hard work and diligence with these investments will pay dividends in the future and can be the start of a seismic shift to our early care and education system in this country. As a mom, I thank you. As Lieutenant Governor, I thank you. Our children are so lucky to have advocates like you. Have a good rest of your time together, learning about these investments and sharing ideas. Chimigwech.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. Thank you, Katie Hamm. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And a special welcome and hello, if you don't mind, to the family child care providers who made time to be on the line here today. I see you and I'm so excited. My name is Mary Beth and I'm on the team with the National Association for Family Child Care. And I'm excited to move us into some more conversation about how states can get their new funds out the door. What are the barriers to avoid and what works for providers and what are some lessons that we've learned. Sherylmoorman, are you here? Hi, Cheryl. It's always such a joy to spend time with you, and thanks so much for doing this. Thanks so much for doing this today. Let's start getting to know you just a smidge. Tell us about you and your family child care program and your community enrichment.
Awesome. Thank you first for the opportunity to be able to share with you. My name is Cheryl Morman. I am a licensed family child care provider in Richmond, Virginia. I have been a licensed family child care provider for 20 years, and I am enjoying the ride, truly.
Cheryl, as we moved through 2020 and we moved through the pandemic, what were some things that made the CARES Act grant, Virginia's choices in the CARES Act grant, work for you as a provider?
As a provider, the greatest thing is that Virginia did not limit the funds to just those providers that received subsidy. We were all struggling regardless of, and we're still in the struggle. I don't want you to think that the struggle is over. We are still struggling, but they did not limit it to just subsidy providers. The funding has been really beneficial and it has helped us, especially with the private pay parents that are struggling as well, and sometimes there's a dip in their income, and it has helped to sustain us and continue to run our business for the need of the children and families that are in our care.
That's awesome. That's awesome, and maximizing, taking advantage of that flexibility and really looking at the whole of the child care provider community and who's counting on you. Tell us more about how those grants worked. What did you get? How did they roll out?
Initially, the funding was more so for daycare centers than they were for family day home providers. Now, family day home providers were included, but the CARES Act funding was a much higher form of grant funding than there were for family day homes. And as family child care providers and our state association, we had to advocate for more funding. And we were able to do that because it was shown that as family child care providers, we were the ones that were still on the front line. We were the ones that were still working from sun up to sundown. We didn't have staff, or the staff that we had, it was us that they seen every day. Every family that we greeted, every child that we had in care depended on us. The community needed us. And although we were tired, but we knew what we had to do to sustain the economy for the families that we had in care.
Can you tell us some more about how you did that, how you and the state association and state leaders in Virginia sort of came together to share information about what needed to be done?
Yes, so we reached out through our partnership with Virginia Department of Education, with Virginia Early Childhood Fund. We sent a letter letting them know that we were not satisfied with the way that the CARES Act funding was being used, and this is the reason why. And we stipulated that, because we are on the front line, it should be given out adequately, and we shouldn't have to take a loss because we were family child care providers and not operating in the center. So regardless of our setting, high quality care was still being given. And we were here. We were here to do it, and we should not be penalized because we were doing it out of our homes. And they heard us. They were able to give an increase from the first CARES grant 1 and 2, and we're still pushing forward for the next CARES grant funding that'll be coming down the pipe to say, thank you for the increase, but we're still not quite there yet. So we're still going to keep pushing forward.
I think your association's partnership with state agencies is a very powerful one and an important one. It doesn't happen overnight. I sure appreciate that you and the state agencies in Virginia see each other now. Tell me about a state policy or action as we think about you, Cheryl, and your program and the families counting on you. What state policy or action helped you the most?
The CARES funding definitely helped. I mean, we also in our program, unfortunately, during the Christmas holiday, we got hit with the COVID virus. So we were diagnosed with having COVID, and our families were they were great. And we kept them informed as we went through that process. But there was still, after we got through that storm, there was a lot of cleaning and preparing, although we cleaned, all the time from the virus in preparation so that we would not contract the virus in our program. But things happened and we did. And there was a great expense that came behind that, because not only did I personally have to clean our living space, but I run a business out of my space. So our entire home had to be sanitized, and we did that for the health and safety of the children that we have in care. We went the extra mile to be able to provide a healthy, safe environment. And that expense was, it was expensive, but the CARES grant funding that came along with that, it helped. It definitely helped for us to be able to take care of that and operate and still continue to pay my assistant that was here, still being able to pay her because I needed her to come back. And we still had to go back to work after we were able to open. So that funding definitely helped to support that.
Cheryl, thanks. What do you need? What does family child care need from our state leaders?
We need for them to know that as early childhood providers, family child care should be included. We should not be an afterthought. There should not be any division in that. We are early childhood educators. We just do it out of our homes. But high quality is still being brought forward. And that is what we run our programs off of. We run our programs based on them being health and safe and high quality programs. We invest a lot of time. We invest a lot of money. And we do what we have to do, but we need for those that are making decisions to know that we are a part of that early childhood. We're a part of early childhood as you're thinking about the funds being used. So don't leave us out.
Cheryl, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's turn to Keisha in Kentucky, and then we'll come back.
We're extremely fortunate to be joined right now by Keisha Smith, who is a center director in Newport, Kentucky. We're going to talk to Keisha, who I know many of you will understand is in the car right now. I know child care directors and educators everywhere will understand where you got to go to have an interview. So Keisha, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Just start real quick by just describing a little bit about your center, who you are, who you serve, sort of how you survived this pandemic so far.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Keisha. I am a center owner in Newport, Kentucky. Newport is a small area in the northern Kentucky part of Kentucky. We are a predominantly low-income area. We service, most of our families get to us by feet. They walk. A lot of them don't even own cars. Most of our families, except for two, are state-funded families. good families just trying to survive day by day. We service ages 6 weeks to 5 years old. I've been in business since August of 2015. And I think I just kind of survived this pandemic being realistic. I wasn't able to bring back all 8 of my staff because I'm at 50% below my enrollment right now. I have 5 staff that I am truly grateful for, who has been there with me since I opened back up the end of June, I think it was. We were able to come back. I didn't open back up immediately. I came back like 2 weeks later, and we've just been surviving, just being strong, being dedicated, and just being patient with each other and the whole financial crash that we've taken. I myself have a whole nother full-time job. I think my blessing was that I actually own my center. I own the building that I operate out of, because honestly, if I didn't, I've talked to so many centers that have had to shut down because they couldn't afford the rent anymore or the mortgage anymore. So, my heart goes out to them. But I think that's really what my blessing was, that I didn't have to pay that extra overhead of a rent or a mortgage, because if I did, I would not probably be having this conversation.
Absolutely. I speak to the situation that a lot of folks are facing, having additional jobs to be able to make ends work or to be able to make ends meet. So one of the things, we were just talking about, you mentioned that your enrollment is about half. I know that's a situation folks are facing right now, and that's partly this federal funding to sort of help stabilize your programs while you're dealing with decreased enrollment, therefore decreased revenue, and a lot of increasing expenses. You've had the opportunity to get some of the grants that the state of Kentucky has given over the past using their CARES dollars. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about what kind of grants you received, how they supported the center, and how you use those dollars as we help states think about their own grants and their stabilization funds looking forward.
So what I did with the grants that I think I've actually gotten 2. I could be mistaken, but I think I've gotten 2. I gave my staff bonuses just to show them that I appreciated them, and to let them know that, we can just ride this wave out together. By the grace of God, we're going to get through it. And then I paid like my center insurance up for the whole year so that I wouldn't have to worry about that. I paid my state unemployment insurance up for the year. So like my larger monthly ticket expenses, I kind of tried to pay those off for the year with those grant funding, so that when revenue is down and I don't have the money, I won't have to take from that to pay it. I can still use it for my operational purposes.
Can you talk a little bit about, one of the challenges of sort of thinking about how a grant program comes in, how expenses come in and out? Can you talk a little bit about, what's your ideal structure for how often you would get a grant, what it would be, how it would come to you? What's the easiest way that states can ask you questions? We talked a little about, to fill out a contract, sort of what should states be thinking about to make it accessible for as many centers and family childcare homes as possible to get the kind of stabilization grants that they can set up?
I think the second notice that the state had sent out to us saying that they were going to actually roll out 3 separate grants, I thought that was phenomenal in how they were, doing it. I think every 2 months they're going to give a grant for up to 3 grants. I think that's going to be beneficial, because hopefully it will allow us to kind of set aside a little bit of money to kind of have a little payroll cushion, so that, because the way Kentucky pays, they pay you in arrears. So if I run out of money this month in payroll, I can't pay unless I pay out of my pocket, because I won't get paid again until April. Like, if you bill on the 1st, you don't get the money till around the 12th. So there's a huge delay there, and your payroll might fall into that, that breakdown. So with us having that money coming in, hopefully some of us are able to set a little bit of it aside just to have a payroll cushion for emergency type of situations, because it happens.
So that consistency, knowing ahead of time what's going to come, when it's going to come, is really helpful in terms of planning, being able to manage that for states.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, so you gave some bonuses with your grants, and I know, one of the things that the state did was sort of tell educators to expect some of those bonuses coming through, to expect some compensation. We talked a little bit about, the challenges of obviously wanting to support your staff, wanting to make sure educators get the, increased funding that they need, that they've been putting themselves on the line for so long. And the challenges of, this uncertain time, wanting to increase their bottom line in terms of their salaries and bonuses. What would it take for you as sort of a director to be able to confidently be able to increase the baseline salaries of the educators and staff in your program? What would you need from the state?
So for my particular center, I would need for the state to pay us more CCAP money. So for example, I get $28 a day for one infant. And they, according to CCAP, you can provide care for 10 hours. So if you do the math on that, you're basically paying me $2.80 an hour to care for this infant. But then I want to pay my staff, who's doing an awesome job taking care of this infant, $10 an hour or $11 an hour, when logically I can't afford that. Because if you're only paying me $2.80 and I got 5 infants in there, that still doesn't add up until that person's payroll. One person's payroll is not covered by 5 infants. So I think the state needs to pay us more daily rates for the care that we're providing. I don't think that whoever came up with that $28 divided it by those 10 hours to see that they're actually asking us to give this top-notch care. Because I'm a level 4 child care center, according to STARS. I'm level 4. So I have all the equipment, I have all the training, but you still gonna pay me $2.80 to give all this high-quality child care. That's less than minimum wage.
Absolutely. I think we've all seen in the context of the pandemic just how little folks understand the finances of childcare. Keisha, anything else that you want states and state leaders and other advocates who are listening to know about what you need to be supported, stabilize, thrive in the months and years ahead?
I just would like for them to know that we appreciate everything that they are doing, but I also feel like I want them to put themselves in our shoes, like really, really take a deep dive into the deep end and see the breakdown and the logistics of it. Can't build a brick house with sandstone. It's gonna collapse.
It's time to build the foundation that we know we all need. Well, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you, all of your staff, and everything that y'all are doing.
And we appreciate you guys. Thank you.
All right, Keisha, thank you for that. And Lauren, Hogan, thanks for making that possible too. I am now very excited to learn from Carla Whiteside-Hicks, who is the Director of TANF and Early Childhood Programs at the Kansas Department of Children and Families. Carla, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Tell us, what was the most effective action you took to get money out the door in Kansas?
Well, let me start by saying we were in a unique position in Kansas, and when we realized that, yep, this really is a pandemic and it's not going anywhere anytime soon, using our PDG funds, we had just completed a statewide needs assessment. So we already had that recent data, and that led to our Kansas Early Childhood Strategic Plan. Add to that, I have a person on my childcare team, amazing young woman, who had recently completed a certified public manager certification program, and her capstone project happened to be on the distribution of disaster funds. And she was thinking, tornadoes, things like that, those things that we have in Kansas, but we were able to use her model to actually drive how we got these funds out the door. So that's what we had going in. But I think the most important thing we did was to engage our community partners. We started off with our statewide R&R, who just already had that information about how we reached providers and had the mechanism, the system in place for getting money out the door. And because we share a vision, our commitment to serving our families, they understood that priority, that urgency. And they were amazing. They reached out throughout the state, and when they recognized, oh, we really don't have enough, the capacity to reach this area over here, They then contracted with 3 other agencies so that we could saturate the state and make sure that everyone, all of our providers had the information that they needed to be able to apply for funds.
Let's talk more about that. How do you track which providers have received funds? How will you use that data? How will you use that information to ensure there's equitable distribution of funds going forward with the American Recovery Plan?
So this is one of those areas in which it's important that we are all playing nicely in the same sandbox. So we have our R&Rs, and they know what providers got money. And we took that information and combined that with our licensing agency. And so they know all of our providers in the state. And so we could compare those lists and say, oh, we were only able to reach this population over here. We missed a whole category, over there, and could then do some outreach to get to those providers and to get money to them also.
Tell us about some lessons of the last year. What lessons did you learn about how to spend the funds efficiently and effectively?
Kudos to our governor. And one of our best lessons was to make sure that we are in alignment with our governor's vision and commitment to early childhood programs, because we knew that going in. So even when we were a little bit uncertain and hesitant, to begin with, because we were thinking, okay, we're going to have to save some money here just in case, we're going to need it later, not knowing that there was definitely some other money coming, but knowing that we had her full support, it kind of empowered us to structure our funding opportunities so that we really could support transformative change. We used our existing systems and our partnerships to quickly get that money out the door. And we learned that to take some chances, to take some risk. Our kids deserve that. And so that we just went for it. I think, is it Texas who says go big or go home? That was our philosophy. And so that's what we did.
That's great, Carla. Thank you. As we think about the weeks ahead, what help do you need from advocates?
I would say that what we could really use is help promoting that message that this focus that we have right now on early childhood programs cannot be temporary. We have to be able to sustain these initiatives that we are supporting with these recovery funds.
What would you say is your most important lesson from the last year too?
I'm reminded of a quote by Angela Davis, and it's, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. And I would say that is the most important lesson I know that I have learned. This has been a reminder to those of us in Kansas that our kids, our children, deserve our commitment to fight for and to support transformative change that could increase their likelihood of positive outcomes in life. And so we're going to fight for our kids.
Carla, we're so lucky to have you. Thank you. Cheryl, are you still there? Would you like to share your most important lesson of the last year as well?
Yes, I am. The most important lesson that we as a nation has learned is that early child care has always suffered. And now everybody truly knows that early childhood was suffering. And there are things that need to be put in place to strengthen that. We are all better together, and we all have to work together to make it stronger for all of our children, our present children and our future children. And this pandemic has given us a platform to be able to do that. I'm in my home. This would not have taken place prior to the pandemic. No one really would have heard my voice because I would still be working, and the meeting would have taken place without me in the office building that I could not get to because I am still working. So as long as I just hope that Zoom calls and these type of platforms continue, because we have not yet arrived So as long as these type of platforms are here, more family child care providers can have a seat at the table. And if you really want to know what's going on in the world of family child care, we will be glad to tell you.
That's awesome, Cheryl. Thank you so much. Carla, thank you so much. Lauren Hogan, back to you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Carla, Cheryl, thank you, Mary Beth. I am also going to introduce Leila Schochet, who is with us now. It is my great pleasure to welcome Leila, who's the policy advisor for Childcare Champion, Senator Patty Murray, and an absolute boss for all things early childhood education. Leila, thank you so much for sharing just a few minutes of your time today. We're really glad to have you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Lauren. Good to be here. Exciting group of folks together. So excited to be here.
We're so glad to have you. We have heard today from Katie at ACF, from state leaders like Carla, from providers, from advocates about sort of what they have been and what they will be doing with the funds. And I'm just sort of wondering, what were some of the things that, you know, over the last year, we've all visited, we've talked to your office and many offices, you've heard and your colleagues from many of the folks on this call and beyond. What were the things that you guys were hearing over the past year that you were responding to when you put forth this, you know, last tranche of $39 billion in Congress through CCDBG and the stabilization funds?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody here and this community and all of the advocates for the incredible advocacy you all did in coming to talk to our office, and everybody on the Hill, as well as really gearing the national conversation to focus on childcare in a way that it's really never been focused before, in my opinion, in the middle of a global pandemic, no less. So first off, thank you to you all for really the work you did to demonstrate the robust need for childcare funding. It was really because of those efforts that Congress was compelled to respond with a historic and robust investment in childcare, most recently including $39 billion in the American Rescue Plan, which was incredibly exciting. You know, I think, so the American Rescue Plan has two pots of funding, $24 billion for childcare stabilization, and then $15 billion for CCDBG. And that was definitely in response to a lot of what we were hearing from the ground. So first and foremost, we heard from you all loud and clear that there was a significant need for childcare stabilization, right? We were hearing from providers on the brink of closure who are facing increased costs and severe drops in revenue because of decreased enrollment or temporary closures, you know, which is extremely concerning. You know, NAEYC surveys showed the shocking and very disturbing number of providers that were on the brink of closure, and did a really good job of mapping out the, you know, real urgency of getting funds directly into the pockets of providers to keep their businesses afloat. And then we also heard about states that were like choosing to use their CARES Act dollars to stand up grant programs for providers, and deciding that that was what the need was in their state, which really gave a really helpful set of models for us to build on at the federal level. So that led to the Child Care Stabilization Grant idea. You know, the intent of those funds is for them to be used quickly and for them to provide really robust funding to providers. You know, one of the things that we did hear from some states was, you know, or from providers in some states, was that the grants that they received helped bridge a gap, but were not necessarily large enough to keep them in business throughout the pandemic. And so we built in that these grants should be based on providers' operating expenses so that they can really be reflective of what providers need, of what their current expenses are, how, you know, what they need to keep their employees, you know, on payroll, what they need to cover their rent costs, their increased costs due to COVID, et cetera. And, you know, one of the other things is we really want these grants to be accessible, which kind of gets to the previous conversation that was just had with Carla, you know, to all providers, and understanding that not everybody has been able to access public assistance through through PPP loans or other forms of assistance. And so the goal of these funds are also to be really low barrier so that providers can get the funding that they need as quickly as possible. So in short, that money, get it out quickly, spend it on large grants to keep providers in business and stabilize them and make sure they can continue to operate in their communities. The second pot of funding is $15 billion in very flexible CCDBG funding. That funding maintains the same flexibilities as were in the CARES Act. So that money is available for an extra year than normal CCDBG dollars are. It can be used for emergency needs like providing childcare to children of essential workers. States can use it to do basically anything they need in their state to respond to the current crisis. But also, this funding can and should be used to make some more longer term structural reforms to address some of the challenges that predated this crisis predated this COVID crisis in childcare, right? Again, states can really use this funding as flexibly as they need to, but they could do things like increase their reimbursement rates, raise wages for providers, expand eligibility, continue to pay based on enrollment rather than attendance, expand the use of grants and contracts. The world is the oyster with these funds, and I think that was the goal, to understand that, in addition to targeted funds for grants to providers, there's also significant need for states just through CCDBG as well. So, I think this funding is definitely something that can help move the needle for childcare in states, and it really should be used to do so. And, is a huge win for childcare, right? Like, did anybody ever actually think that $50 billion would be coming down the pipe? Like, I think that was a jaw-dropping number a year ago today, and now that's something that should be getting out to everyone soon. So, really exciting.
It is really exciting. It is a true testament to so many people who came together to make that happen, and to a shifting narrative, a shifting understanding, public, journalists, media, to really drive this understanding, and for Congress to be having so many folks listening and hearing over and over again about the challenges. And it's so helpful to hear just about sort of the intent behind some of what was here as folks sort of move this forward. One of the things we know, it is a lot of funding, and it feels like a lot precisely because the childcare system has been starved for so long. And, when we're thinking about stabilization, and thinking about relief, we're not trying to think about a return necessarily just to the sort of prior crisis, right? And the prior set of instability. We're thinking about stability, the sort of idea of stabilization broadly, about the sense of building a stable system that is built on a well-prepared and compensated workforce that can stay, that doesn't turn over, because they're supported and compensated as for the essential and valuable work they do. How do you think talk to me a little bit more about how you think about sort of the concept of stabilization, like really what that means to you and how you guys thought about it in your work?
Yeah, I totally agree with you that stabilizing doesn't necessarily mean going back to the status quo. I think it's important to think about stabilizing and strengthening the childcare sector. And, again, thinking that stabilizing is not just going to mean getting providers and families through the next few months of the pandemic. Even if we do help a provider get through the next few months, that's not going to fix the fact that they were on thin margins before this, right? Or the fact that subsidy reimbursement rates only cover a fraction of the true cost of childcare, or that, families are paying too much, educators are earning too little. All of those factors are going to still be there, even if we are able to ideally keep these providers in business through stabilization. So I think there's definitely a lot that we as a community and that state should be doing to think about what they can do to strengthen the sector with these funds and kind of, really set the foundation for additional reforms and additional progress for funding in childcare. I definitely understand that there's concern about making longer term structural changes when it feels like this is a one-time infusion of funding, right? Absolutely understand that it's scary to increase reimbursement rates or raise wages when 5 years from now that funding might not be there. But I also think it's really important to remember that the childcare community and we as advocates have been calling for increased funding for childcare for so long, right? That has always been the ask, saying we're facing these challenges. We need additional funding to bridge all of these gaps in this starved system. And Congress has just provided $53.5 billion over the past year in response. And, you know, it is in the middle of a pandemic. It is a one-time infusion of funding, or that's what it feels like right now. But this is a critical opportunity to demonstrate what kind of progress can be made for childcare when we actually invest in it. You know, I think it's a lot easier to make the case to continue progress 5 years from now, or when this funding, you know, it runs out, than it is to fight for that funding in the first place to make progress. So, you know, I think to the extent that this can be used as an opportunity to say, look at all the families we served, look at all the new providers we opened, look at or kept in business, you know, look at all the staff that we retained and raised wages for and are supporting so much better now. That is the conversation that we need to be having, rather than it's too much money. Because to be totally frank with this group, if the ground is saying we need money and then they get money and then they're saying it's too much money, we can't spend it, it's going to be very difficult for us to continue to make the case that the field needs money. So I think, you know, really taking a step to make some of these investments, to make some longer term structural changes, whether that is expanding eligibility, increasing subsidy rates, raising wages. I'm a broken record, sorry, those are the ideas that are top of mind, but there's so much that can be done. You know, I think that's going to be really, really important. I think this represents an opportunity. And I will say I understand this is not enough to fix the childcare crisis. I don't think anybody thinks that, but it is certainly enough to move the needle.
Can we talk? Absolutely. Absolutely. It is both, right? It is both not enough to do everything, and it is enough to do a lot of things. And so this question of stability and sustainability has obviously come up. You touched upon it. It's come up throughout the webinar time and again, sort of during the session and outside. But, you know, we know there's no crystal ball, but can you talk just a little bit about your boss's commitment to continued sustainable, substantial investment in childcare moving forward, what you need to hear from states that address some of those structural foundational challenges, and sort of as this moves forward to support that forward progress?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say first and foremost, the most helpful thing going forward is for A, states to spend the money, and B, states and advocates to document the impact of that funding, whether that's through numbers, whether that's through, you know, storytelling and people coming to their members of Congress to explain what this funding really meant for children, families, and providers in your states and communities. That's going to be incredibly important, because this can this can serve as a case study, right? And an example of to show the world really what can be done when there are investments made in childcare. And of course, all 50 states are going to have drastically different plans and ideas, and being able to uplift best practices, lessons learned is going to be really helpful. You know, Senator Murray is certainly committed to continuing to push for longer term childcare reform. She has a bill called the Childcare for Working Families Act, which continues to represent kind of her longer term vision for childcare reform that really takes steps to drastically expand childcare access, affordability, increase wages for the workforce, and so much more. I know we're short on time, so I won't dive into the weeds on that, but always happy to talk about it further for anyone that's interested. I think folks should also pay attention to President Biden's forthcoming Build Back Better plan. You know, media reports are showing that there's set to be investments and focus on childcare and preschool in that. And, you know, we'll certainly be continuing to work with the administration on rolling out and implementing the American Rescue Plan, and then also thinking about longer term Build Back Better. So, yeah, it would be fantastic. We love to hear from you. Never feel like you're bugging our office with data or numbers or issues or anything, because it really does make a difference. And I think this money shows that. So yeah.
Leila, thank you so much. Thank you to Senator Murray for just many years of championing childcare, early childhood educators. We're so grateful and are looking forward to working with you and with everybody here on this webinar to build on this for the substantial and sustainable pieces we need. I just want to take a couple minutes to wrap up. Obviously, thank you to Leila, to Katie, to all of the panelists and participants, to Mary Beth and Christine and Danielle, NAEYC, NAFCC, Education Council and CLASP for co-hosting, to all the providers, the children we could hear in the background of Cheryl's Family Child Care Home. And mostly I want to thank all of you. The extraordinary work is sometimes in the everyday, and your everyday work is extraordinary. And then sometimes there's a moment that is truly out of the ordinary. And this is that moment as well, in the context of the pandemic, and the violence that's going on, and in the fact that we have gotten more than $50 billion in relief for childcare, for a field in which we serve fewer than 1 in 7 eligible children, and in which more than half of providers make so little that they live in families that rely on public assistance to make ends meet. We need this money, the field needs this money, and so much more. And to the extent that we confront challenges with getting every dime of these funds out the door, we need to remind ourselves that these challenges are mechanical and technical, they're logistic, they're political, and that doesn't mean they're not real. But you heard from Katie and from Leila today and the providers that we have an obligation to work through those to get to the solutions that will drive real change. We can't say that we know, that we've known for 40 years that one of the main unresolved problems we have is compensation, because programs have wait lists, but entire rooms are getting unstaffed, because educators are leaving for jobs in and outside of the early childhood field. Why would someone get a degree to earn $10.60 an hour? And then not spend a substantial pot of money to resolve the main problem because we're worried that we can't solve it for everyone or forever. People need money right now. We should give them money right now. 3 years is a long time in the life of a young child. It's a long time in the life of a young child. And you heard Leila say, I'm paraphrasing here, but the best way to ensure that this is only short-term funding is to spend it all like it's only short-term funding. So we look forward to working together to build power with everyone to get to a place where we can change some of the structural and foundation elements of this system with an eye towards ensuring that these funds get to the workforce and invest in the long and short-term stability that's needed. Very quickly, a few additional opportunities and resources. On this Saturday, March 27th at 1 o'clock, a number of groups are coming together to host a free webinar on understanding federal funding, what's in it for family childcare. This is going to be presented in Spanish and in English. We'll drop the registration link into the chat, and you can find it on social media pages for a number of the organizations. For an overview on what's included in the relief package, Learning the First 5 Years has a great summary that we'll drop in and share with folks. There are slides, resources, the recording, and follow-up resources as well with everybody who's registered, who was able to join today and who's watching later. We have a resource for how states can spend the $10 billion for childcare well and wisely, as well as the information about how states have said to ACF they're going to spend the dollars. We'll chop both of those into the chat. And a summary of how the states are going to spend the money. All of these resources are helping to take folks into the how of implementation, which is where I know all of our heads are at, and rightly. But as we close today's webinar, I just want to encourage us to take a second to be in the why, which is where Katie started her presentation this afternoon. Every single one of the more than 800 people who registered for this webinar believes in the power of early childhood education to increase quality, to advance justice, and to support children, women, and families. That's why we're here. And someday I get to hear my son's little first grade class repeat after their teacher that we can do hard things. And I just want to say that we can do hard things because we know why we're doing them and we know who we're doing them for. So thank you to everyone. Stay safe and well, and get ready to spend every dime.